Hello and welcome. I'm Till for Guitar and Tunes. I'm here at the Studio Szene again with the amazing Warren Ewart. So great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for
And
calling me amazing. I was looking around like, who's he talking about?
it's like,
Who is he talking about?
I'm
Yeah.
the only one here. So you're a music producer. You're probably best known for your YouTube channel as well. Produce like a pro. And I have some production-based questions for you
Great.
that I would like to, talk about. I would just throw you something, and you just talk about your experience. You're doing this for a few years now, so I'm sure you have something to tell.
Yeah, I woke up one day, actually, a couple of weeks ago and realized that we'd just hit 10 years and didn't even do a big deal about it. It was like, oh, wait there, our first video was 10 years ago.
You didn't celebrate.
Well, I think we were doing something like this and had just finished doing another one of these kinds of things. Like the last 3 weeks, we were in the UK, Greece, New York, UK, Germany. So,
It's a busy life.
it's a busy life doing, but it's a quality problem, as they say.
Yeah, it is. It's a
Not
very,
going to complain.
very first world problem.
It's a very first problem.
So my first question, let's just dive in, talk about mixing and especially mixing workflow, because I'm
Yep.
I'm a very big mixing workflow focused person. I really
Yeah.
like to have my workflow in order. And what I learned is that there is like a certain base to it that most people do a rough mix, and from there you can really go like every direction.
Sure.
So what's in your experience after all this year, what's really something that you would say is totally indispensable to have a good mix starting from the rough mix?
Yeah, this is difficult because we've just been. I was just having a discussion with Bob over there, who I'm pointing at, and I think one of the things that would really, really help when it comes to your mixing is to make sure that your production is on point, that you've committed ideas. So the mix is less of a rescue and more of an enhancement. I think a lot of the time, the overemphasis on education built around mixing only means that people are hoping that a problem they've created in their production or something they have no idea how it's going to sound suddenly is going to be solved in the mixing process. So rough mixes are super, super important. And I think that a lot of guys that I know have been doing this a long time have kind of got into a place now where they're frankly mixing as they go. Now, that's people that have got a lot of acquired knowledge, that have done this for a few decades, 10, 20, 30 years of recording. They are making those decisions as they go. So you as a guitar player, not going, oh, what effects should I put on the mix, but have actually chosen those effects and those ideas as you go. So rough mixes are super, super important, and rough mixes should be done at all times during the whole recording process. Another great thing to do is to always be printing rough mixes. So
to summarize stuff
Yeah, to
while
summarize
you're already
stuff.
working on it.
always when you open up your session and you're doing an overdub, maybe a month later, a week later, the same day, whatever, create a new session name. So you've got a catalog of the ideas that you put down. So let's just say I don't know your writing process, but let's just say you've got an electric guitar idea and you're going to start with this riff down. You've got a riff. So you've got your riff. You put it down. You put your first beat against it. You've done your first 2 or 3 instrumental ideas against it. Now, day 2, you come back. Make sure you don't just work straight into that. Keep that as a separate session. What I always do is I always duplicate the session so I can always go back to the original idea, because sometimes what was good about your original idea was kind of a tension, a groove that was happening between a drum part and a guitar part. And it might be that you're now 4 days into working on a track and you've got all of these overdubs, and then you put a vocal down, now you want to mix, but there's something missing. You don't know why it is. Why is it not good anymore? Then you go back to that day one idea and go, oh, I just did 500 too many overdubs, or even just 2, let's not exaggerate, just 2 overdubs that was just too much, that took away from the original groove and feel of my track. So I think rough mixes are really important at the end of a tracking session, at the end of working on a song. Even if you're just working on your own, just print a rough mix so you can go back and reference. It could be a very, very powerful tool. Otherwise, if you've got this one section that you're always printing into, you'll have no idea to go back to a point where that made more sense, where it felt better, because what seems like a really great overdub idea can also, on one day can also be what's removing some of the groove, the feel, something interesting about that song. So, and I love commitment. Like I said, I love being able to say, this is the guitar sound and these are the parts that I'm putting on. Not only the parts, sorry, these are the sounds that I'm using, the effects that I'm using, rather than deciding to do that at the end, because if I leave it to the end, I am overdubbing, sometimes for the sake of overdubbing, filling something in. A good example is listen to a Radiohead song. If I was to say, go to the Benz or OK Computer, listen to those records. If I was to ask somebody randomly how many guitar parts they thought on a song, they're probably going to say 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 guitar parts, thinking, well, it's Radiohead, it's really complicated. You'll be amazed. You'll go back and realize that there's 2, possibly only 3 parts playing at any one time on any of those songs. However, the sounds are huge. They've got an amazing, huge guitar sound. I don't mean huge as in like, metal kind of like thing. I mean huge as in like taking up like, oh, there's this incredible effect. There's this weird flanging delay.
It's picking up the song and is really bringing it somewhere
Yeah.
else. You already fed a little bit into my next question.
Okay.
So I would like to go there. Like you talked a lot about like maybe you add something to the mix and to the production in the recording stage that can kind of kill the mood or kill the song or kill the production a bit. What's in your experience one thing that can easily kill a production, like that people are not aware of enough, that you say this is like one major mistake people do all the time and it can easily like kill the whole production or the whole mixing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think over editing can really, really kill things.
What is over editing in your sense?
I think a lot of these sort of arguments at the moment about modern music production compared with older music production is
so overproduced.
Overproduced, yeah. Is sort of is making choices based. When you had an artist and a band in the studio, up until maybe late 90s, early 2000s, they were always performing together in a studio. And yes, there was some editing involved. Pro Tools was around since the mid-90s to a good enough level that you could use it in a good way. I started using it in the mid-90s. But we would typically correct things that were obviously wrong, that maybe it saved us the time of like, there's no need to go in and retrack the whole song because that drum fill going into the second verse on take 4 was better. So you just copy it in to the new take, and there it is. Saved you bothering to go and do another overdub just because you knew you had it. Then it became like, well, it could be a little bit tighter, and so we would tighten it a little bit. And before you know it, it became like, well, if you tighten the drums, now you've got to tighten the bass player because now the drums have moved too much. Now the bass has to tighten. Well, yeah, but now we have to tighten the guitar. And before you knew it, everything became mathematically accurate.
Now you're cutting every syllable out of the vocals and time.
Yeah, before you know it, where a human being doesn't perceive it necessarily being any tighter as such, it starts to feel mechanical. It starts to feel like, where bands used to obviously rehearse and do pre-production before going into the studio. So if you're the drummer and you rush the fill, like a lot of like Keith Moon fills were like, he would always sort of speed up, but then Bonham would do these kind of fills where he would lay back a downbeat sometimes, like, and it would be like a punch in the gut, because it would be like this kind of like anticipation, and it would just come in like a nanosecond too late, but that lateness would give it this kind of like release, and that can be there in the recording process, and before you know it, because the musicians are working off each other, but you're like, it doesn't look like it's in time, so I should move it up. And these subtle movements, when they're not perceived as necessarily being out of time, but they look out of time, that's a skill set that we need to acquire. It's listening to music from a perception of like, how does it feel? And as I hate saying that because it's such a vague term, isn't it? It's a feel man. But what I mean is like, is it exciting? Is the bass on top on this section? Is it pushing the beat a little bit? There's actually a head of the drums, like, you know, in a great punk song, sometimes that bass is early. It's before you hear the kick and snare. It's like da 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 da, but it makes you feel kind of a little bit of angst. But if you lay it back so it's more like a Motown track, great. But it's a punk song.
So you would say that over perfectionizing
Yeah.
everything is kind of something that people do too much, and it's kind of ruined, like making everything too mechanical. I think you used that term before.
Yeah.
And taking the humanization out of the music, and now it's just computer music.
Yeah.
Because
and
everything is quantized and
everything is
everything
quantized.
is perfect in pitch, and you know.
It's tough because then what happens is we start using other tools to create the excitement.
Yeah.
So then
We
sort
take
of
the excitement out and then we put it back in.
we try to put it back in with things being aggressively bright and clipped and saturated to add the excitement back in, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's like how do we utilize all of those tools to the best of their ability? I still think you know, if you're in a math rock band, if you're an incredibly well rehearsed math rock band, and you can capture that performance, that to me is still far more exciting and interested than an edited and created math rock band. You know, once you've edited and made it so perfect that it just sort of like washes over you, and you're using the saturation and the clipping and all this stuff to bring the excitement back, you know, you're sort of like chasing your tail. You know, but then there's certain tricks. We talked about it yesterday in a mixing class. We talked about like how you can reduce like low end just ever so slightly, high end ever so slightly in sections, so that when bigger sections come in, you bring back some of that, a little bit more low end, a little bit more highs, and suddenly it seems like, oh my God, how that sounds so big, because people are trying to make things jump out of the speakers all the time. But sometimes the best way to make something jump out of a speaker is to make the section before it not be quite as dynamic, not quite as bright, quite as low-endy, so that when that new section comes in, it's got this, oh, where did that come from? It sounds so huge. Maybe messing with the stereo a little bit, maybe making the guitars like feel like they're panned hard left and hard right, but they're not. They're actually like 75 or 80. So when the chorus comes in, boom, it goes hard left and hard right. Maybe making the drums not 100 on the overheads, but always about 70. So they're just a little bit narrower. So when the left-hand guitar and the right-hand guitar comes in, it feels like the guitar's got wider than the actual track. Just kind of fooling the audience into believing like that verse is as wide as it's ever going to get with the drum sound. You hear all the ambience around the drums, but it's actually panned in slightly. So the wide guitars come in, you're like, how did you do that? It sounds like the guitars are outside, further left and right. They're not, but we're manipulating other things to give that a sort of illusion.
The low end thing and the mixing is actually a very good keyword for my next question, because I saw that you did a video on the SM4 from Shure. Obviously, you're a fan. Like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, they gave us this. I mean, there's so many great companies. We live in a beautiful time, let's be honest, of a time now where affordability for equipment is insane. Somebody
exactly. And so the affordability is not even for pro audio engineers like you, but you can also, like, with a few $100 you can have a decent home recording microphone, and you have very cheap interfaces and so on and so forth.
Yeah, this mic we're talking to here, the SM7, it's probably the DB, is it the DB? Yep, so the DB with the cloud lifter technology built in. I mean, you make a whole record with this one mic. It's probably about 400 or 500 euros or whatever, yeah.
So my question, which is like, it's not a new question, but I also checked the Shure microphones that came out this year. They're amazing, and they're with like increasing technology, increasing quality in cheap technology. What do you think? How far can one get while producing at home in a bedroom studio, and not having like a big recording studio with optimized acoustic, blah blah blah? Because low end is always a problem. And like mixing in general, when you don't have a treated room, is a problem. But how far can you get with very cheap equipment, in your opinion?
Well, the reality is you can make a record that sounds as good as it anywhere else. It's not the equipment as much as it is the ears and how you use the gear that you have. I remember thinking this quite bluntly about 9 or 10 years ago when I just started the channel and somebody interviewed me. I think it was for a magazine back when people used to buy magazines. It was about 10 years ago. Sound and recording, everybody. Buy sound and recording. Where's Mark Bone? Where is he? Support that man over there. We love this guy. Wave, Mark. We're doing the. My daughter does that all the time. The little heart thing. Yeah. You know, I got interviewed for a magazine. I don't remember which one it was, Mix or whatever. And one of those magazines. And they said to me, Warren, what does it feel like now in the 21st century when, you know, because I was making records obviously in the 90s when I first started. So there I was making my first records in the 90s. And they're like, you used to go into a studio in the 90s and you had an SSL console, which was the state of the art at the time, still a beautiful console. It had 4, 5, 6 auxiliary sends, some bussing. And I remember mixing records and looking around and seeing like a Lexicon, you name it, Eventide, you know, but probably realistically access to 3, 4, 5 delays and reverbs. And we were sitting there thinking, well, you know, that's the snare verb. So I don't want to use that on anything else. But there's my vocal verb. I'm probably going to have to use that on the backgrounds as well because, you know, I've got 2 auxiliaries here. So, you know, I'm sitting there like figuring out how I'm going to use my 6 effects.
You were limited.
You were limited. But to me, it didn't feel limited. I was like, I'd come from a 4-track cassette and ADATs. And now suddenly I had like, oh my God, they've got 6 outboard multi-effects units. Wow, there's a PCM 42. I've only ever read about that. Oh my God. You know, all this different oh my God, you know, like.
And they're stereo.
Yeah, and there's stereo. Yeah, like, wow, you know, it was mind-blowing. And so this guy said to me, asked me the question, said, how does it feel like where you went from a place where, you know, 5 or 6, you know, multi-$1,000, you know, units was a luxury to now being able to have each one of those on every single channel of your DAW.
You can.
Yeah, you can go nuts. Now, if you want to have a different reverb on every single channel and thing, you can do it. With the processing power of pretty much any computer these days and any DAW, we can do whatever we want. So, with that in mind, it's really just about the creative decisions that you make. 99% of making records, even in the biggest studios in the world, was overdubs. Once you got your drums and bass and rhythm guitars or pianos or whatever the rhythm structure was of the musicians playing live, everything else was an overdub. Most of it was a 57 or a U47 or something like that, you know. I think Hugh Padgham, Steve Lillywhite, and Ed Cherney all told me the same answer. That when I said to them, if you could make a record and you only had 2 microphones, what would they be? I think Ed and a couple of other guys said SM7 and a U87. And Steve Lillywhite and Hugh Padgham said a 57 and a U87.
What's your answer?
Any variation of that. I think these days, because I've been blessed to try every single microphone ever and people send me everything, I think anything around about $500 or $600 ish in a condenser by most companies is going to be good enough to do anything. You know, that we're at a price point now. The 300, I think the Shure is like $269, and that recording we did, I think, was pretty darn good.
Which Shure?
The one you were talking about, the SM. The SM4.
SM4, yeah, around that.
I think it's like,
in that neighborhood, $300.
Yeah, I think if you get it without the clip and just put it straight on, I think it's like $199 or $200. And that was like one of the first microphones with Lewitt. Lewitt have is it the 240, which I think is 119 or something, or 99.
It's insanely cheap.
Yeah. And is it the best microphone ever? But would it make a record that would get on the radio and that nobody would complain about and say, yeah?
Probably.
I mean, the reason why you might spend more money these days is maybe improvements in sound, but also other reasons. There's other reasons to want to own a U87. One of those reasons are you a commercial studio? If you're a commercial studio and somebody walks in through the door and they see a U87, they're going to be like, this guy's serious. He's serious.
Yeah, he has a good
Neumann.
microphone.
Yeah, he has a Neumann. He knows what he's doing, you know.
You talked about plugins. I just really want to sneak that question in before we go to asking the audience. You talked about plugins and how like universally around and available they are. And I saw that you did a video about what are your top 5 plugins, and I think I'll just steal that question. So what are your top 5 plugins?
It's probably changed since I did that video.
Yeah, it's been like 8 months ago, so
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
probably could redo that.
It's always strange. Reverb these days is definitely Liquid Sonic's Seventh Heaven. Have you guys, everybody got to try that?
Not yet, but I will.
So what's great about that plate is it's based on the Bricasti M7, which is this is an overused phrase, but I will use it. I'm sorry, I apologize. It's an industry standard kind of reverb. Most of the
Like
The-
the lexicon.
yeah, exactly. It's like a modern kind of hardware reverb that if you go into any credible great studio, they'll have one, you know. And people expect it of a certain level if they're going into a studio. They're like, "Where's your, you know?" So anyway, so it is an industry standard piece of hardware that has been recreated in a plug-in form, and it's absolutely superb. The reason why I love it is because reverb for me is a tool that we all use in any genre of music, but can have issues on drums if it's got an excessive low end. You know, I'll usually end up EQing some of the low lows out of the reverb because I've got a kick going poof. You know, I don't want a boo, this kind of like
Yeah,
long.
the boomy long
Yeah.
reverb.
Yeah, and it just
Problem.
messes up, especially if you're doing
Yeah.
like, you know, and the suddenly it's like, I've got no definition on my kick. You know, many of us, I'm sure, if you're doing like heavier music with really complex kick drums, you're actually shortening the decay time of the kick. So it's more like that, rather than because instead of hearing like a thumping kick drum, now you just hear and the only thing that's happening is maybe kind of the attack of the kick is there, but the low end is just one big blob. So we end up always shortening the decay time on like complex kick drum parts. So it's like so you feel the thump as opposed to just a low end rumble. Now
What are the other fours?
well, I want to quickly say why I like the Liquid Sonics is because the Seventh Heaven is because you can go into the EQ of the reverb and adjust it. So I can have reverb on the low end, but I can shorten it, and I can choose exactly what. So I can add to the thump and have some verb on it, but have it only be a nanosecond. I can say, oh, the snare is like about 1.5. I like that. I can increase the decay time on that. So now suddenly the reverb is sculpted to enhance the elements of the drums that I want. It's absolutely brilliant. So number one. Secondly, I would always go for an R bass by Waves. It's my secret weapon on bass guitar.
It is.
It's amazing.
It's great.
And pretty much every major mixer I know uses that. Thirdly, I would say another Waves one is the MV2 because it is the dumbest, quickest way to get a result to even something out. It's particularly great on bass guitars where maybe your bass player is up here like hitting far too hard on the low E, it's fretting out. So instead of being boom, it's like it's just fretting out.
Yeah.
And so I'm enhancing some of the low end, but that note's getting disappear. So you've got an MV2 has got a high and a low level control. So I can take the low level and bring it up, and I can take the high level and bring it down. So I can reduce the dynamic range, you know, but also enhance the low. So it's not an expander, but it can feel like it is. It's taking some of that low level, not low end, but low level information and enhancing it, while also at the same time reducing the dynamic range at the top. And it can make electric basses suddenly just be absolutely beautiful in a mix. So that's 3. 4, actually, another reverb, depending on your DAWs, don't sleep on the reverbs that are built in. In Pro Tools, I'm a Pro Tools user for my sins. I know people love to have very strong opinions. But the deverb in that, the plate, which comes free with it, is still most of my friends' number one favorite plate reverb. And it comes free of your DAW.
It is a good one.
It's a really good one. So if you're whatever DAW you use to sell their DAWs, they do actually spend time figuring out how to make some good plugins. So don't sleep on the plugins that are actually in there. Make sure you listen to before you go out and spend money on anything. Audition all the things that come in there. There's going to be some good stuff. So number 5, that's a difficult one. It's probably without a doubt. Because people are pushing against it, it's going to be OX Sound. It's going to be Soothe 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a big dynamic EQ or multiband compressor guy. I think one of the problems that people face in music and why people don't like a lot of modern mixes is because they're too smooth, too perfect, and too sculpted and great, and therefore boring. Absolutely boring. Everything is so like, oh, oh, it's a little bit harsh there. Let's just tame that. All that. And before you know it, everything has been so, just like it's been so timed and tuned, it's timed, tuned, EQ'd, compressed within a length of its life. And so instead of being this kind of offensive piece of like, rip the headphones off, it's so offensive, that you want rock and punk rock and stuff to be, it all suddenly becomes really nice and beautiful. And what is interesting, when I talk to mastering engineers about dynamic EQ and multi-band compression, I'm like, do you use it? And they're like, never, unless we're trying to solve a problem.
Yeah.
So if there's no problem in your music, don't just use the tools for the sake of it. But OX Sound Soothe 2, if there's going to be one that I'm going to use on a vocal, especially on somebody who's maybe using a cheaper mic or in an environment that's excessively, has increased some horrible high mid frequencies that are ripping my head off, OX Sound Soothe 2 is just like a lifesaver. Yeah, and another one of the correlation. All the plugins I just told you about are also not only my favorites, but I found that most of the people I interview come back to at least 3 of those 5. It's very consistent. Soothe 2, R-Bass, and MV2, and Liquid Sonics. Actually, all of them are pretty much everybody I know's in their arsenal of being, their favorite plugins. And to be honest, if you just gave me those 5 and then stock plugins of any DAW, I can make a mix that will sound as competitive as if I've got any other plugin. That's all I really need to get a great sounding mix.
Interesting.
Because a stock EQ in any DAW is going to do what I need it to do. I don't need an emulation of some famous console, It really comes down to how well something's recorded.
I think when I have like one question left, like after all these years, like what's your... Or should I do the bad music question? Okay, I have one consistent question that I also ask the other people, like the other guys I was interviewing. Do you think that bad music exists?
Bat music?
Yeah.
Music for bats to listen to?
Soft D, bad music.
Oh, bad music. That is the Deutsch English BT swap, isn't it?
Yeah.
We swap B's and T's. Does bad music? Well, I think it was, I can't remember. I think I want to say, I remember Al Schmidt telling me this. God, what's his name? I'm trying to remember the name of this really, really famous jazz musician. I'm completely blanking. Anyway, he made a comment which I absolutely love. Is that there's only 2 types of music, good and bad. And what he meant by that was, if we get too caught up in genres like, I only liked it, and which we all do. When I was young, I had my thing where, I'd move my focus. Suddenly I discovered something new, and that was the best music in the entire world when I was 13. Everything else sucks. You can't have to hear this. As I've got older and wiser, I suppose, musically, it's I can't think of a genre I don't like that there isn't something in it that's great. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If somebody said to me they didn't like hip hop, I'm like, have you heard early hip hop? Have you heard when it was just like being made in like New York and it was just being made by people who had something to say? It's all very well to sort of listen to pop hip hop and go, I don't like it. But then again, who likes pop anything when it's done to a sort of degree of just kind of commercial, as Dr. John used to say, commerciability. When it's done to a level where it's kind of lost a meaning or thought behind it. But if you go back to the origins of any great music, you can find something great in it, because music to me is not just the sonics that we're talking about. Music is a voice of a generation, It's a voice of an ethnicity. It's a voice of a socio-economic group. There's more to music than what we're talking about. So if you go back and you listen to It Takes a Nation of Millions, and I got a letter from the government the other day, you're talking about somebody telling you about oppression.
Please, Mr. Policeman, please don't take my stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
Yeah. This is what music is. And I love the fact that we can turn on YouTube and listen to people talking about, well, the Phrygian Lydian. Great. Yeah, it's great. I love that because I can read and write music. I understand modes. I love all of that stuff. But music at its core, when it speaks to generations of people, There's nobody. We're not listening to the Pistols or the Damned or something like that and going, yes, well, I really like the intermodulation between the blah blah blah. No, we're listening to somebody who's trying to say something. When the Undertones sung Teenage Kicks, they weren't multimillionaires. They were just talking about what it was like to be 16, 17, 18 years old in Northern Ireland, growing up at a time when there was all these tensions. And it was a song just telling you about that. And it spoke to a whole generation of kids, because even they weren't having that experience of the troubles in Northern Ireland, but what they were having was their own angst and their own teenage, they wanted to talk about their own teenage kicks. They could identify with it. And this is so much more than, So when it comes to good and bad, there's great music in every genre. I can't think of a genre. Somebody name a genre where there's no good music in it. There isn't. I don't think there's such a thing. Yeah.
We could go on if it was for me for like another hour, but we have to respect the other
Well, it
artists.
says you've got
coming
1
up.
hour 30 seconds or something. Oh, we
We are
went over.
time.
Oh, are we getting
As
told
always.
off?
But thank you so much for all your.
There's a round of applause for you.
Yeah, no, it's for you.
No, it's for you. You're speaking.
Thank you so much for all your answers. It's been a
thank you.
pleasure, and I think I have nothing to say except thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Have a good time. See you next time.
Thanks, Tillman.
Bye.
I really appreciate it.